A few weeks ago, I received an email from an attorney friend about a referral. He didn't give me details, but he was looking for an attorney who handled veterinary malpractice cases. Now, you know we're not lawyers, but we do have many contacts in the animal and pet universe, and I was able to provide a few leads. But I do know that legal action against veterinarians is rare, and successful cases for malpractice even rarer. You do hear a lot of social media chatter about someone claiming their vet harmed or killed their dog or cat, but usually things are not clear-cut, and even so, the law and history and culture does not favor owners at all. So where do we stand in the area of veterinary malpractice? What are the good and bad points in current law to protect animals, treat our veterinarians fairly, and give a voice to pet owners? I'm pleased to welcome to the show Bob Ferber, attorney and former Los Angeles animal cruelty prosecutor. Bob, let's start by having you give an overview of veterinary malpractice. What are the elements we'll need to discuss here?
All right, I think the first thing to understand is that, well, everybody knows that there's such a thing as medical malpractice, where a doctor or a hospital makes a terrible mistake that can cause somebody to suffer or even die. There's a procedure in this country where you can go to a malpractice lawyer and you can sue the doctor or the hospital, and you can recover not just the cost of what you paid for that surgery that went bad, but you could recover huge amounts of money for this pain, the suffering, even the impact that it might have on some of your other family members, loss of income, loss of companionship. These can range anywhere from 10 to hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars. The difference with animals is that it goes back to a topic that we've discussed, Lori, many times on the radio show, and your listeners are well aware of. In the United States and most parts of the world, animals are not treated as living, sentient, feeling creatures, but as property.
Right.
And the law looks at animals in almost every situation the way they would look at damage to, let's say, your car. If a mechanic put in the wrong oil filter and it leaked on your garage floor and there's oil there and maybe damage to the car, the most that you'd be able to get from the mechanic is the cost of repairing the car and maybe cleaning up your driveway.
Yeah.
But that's it. Of course, we as animal lovers know that that doesn't work. Our animals are not a car or a chair, and that compensating us for just the cost of the vet visit that didn't go well is not satisfactory. And so over the years, I've gotten many, many calls from people calling me as a prosecutor, even though, Lori, that's not what my job was, saying, you know, I took my cat to the vet for a standard, let's say, to be neutered, and he died in surgery. Or they gave him a medication, I'll say a medication called Rimadyl, which is a common medication given to animals, and my animal died 3 weeks later. And or my animal's having a whole variety of things. And people come to me and say, well, what do I do? How can I get compensated? And what they also say, by the way, is, how can I prevent this from happening again? Which is really important, because I think it's important to know that when people do have this tragedy, most of the people I've talked to don't just want money. They're not out there for that. They're out there to make sure that other animals are protected and that justice was done.
Right.
The problem, Lori, is that our system still looks at it as a car where the wrong oil filter was put in. And so when something terrible happens to your animal because a veterinarian did something wrong, if it's shown that it was malpractice, and I'll mention in a second what that is, the most that you can recover pretty much is the cost of whatever that vet bill was, and not much more. If you have a show dog that is worth something more than, that has a market value where it can be sold for like $1,000, you can get maybe that. But, of course, most of our pets that we have are not show animals. Their market value, which is the standard for recovery, is simply, how much did we pay to adopt them? That's about it. So now that leads us to the question of what is malpractice. Malpractice, whether it's humans or veterinarians, is defined as when the vet or the doctor does something that was negligent, that where the doctor or the vet should have known that this medication was the wrong medication and that it was negligent. But it's important to stress that they should have known based on the medication, the condition of the animal, what the client, the pet owner, told the vet, and that would determine it. And it also is defined the standard for what that vet should have done. That's pretty much goes by what do all the other vets in Los Angeles or the Inland Empire do, or what do all the vets in California do in this situation. And an example is like Rimadyl, which is given for certain conditions. Rimadyl was one of an infamous drug that when it first came out, there were many animals that died from the drug. And there was a lot, and yet the information that was given to the vets didn't show all the side effects and the possible risks. So when these animals died, in that case, it was the manufacturer that had committed negligence, not the vets. And so many people sued their vet. And the vet said, look, I gave the medicine. There was nothing in the flyer that told me as a veterinarian that I couldn't give this medicine to your dog, Fluffy. And so what would happen is there was no legal case. Interestingly, a little footnote to that, Lori, is that Rimadyl at the beginning kind of apologized in a legal way and did reimburse many dog owners for the cost of their vet bill. But a friend of mine lost one of their golden retrievers to Rimadyl 3 weeks after they were given it. All they got was the reimbursement for the $500, $600 for the vet bill. So that's the general definition of malpractice is, did the vet do something that they should have known they shouldn't have done? But that leads to a whole situation, a very complicated situation that in the end doesn't really help out the vet owner. The pet owner. When somebody calls me, Lori, and says, this is what happened, I brought my dog to the vet, and 2 days later, they called me and said he died in surgery. Or a very common situation is, I brought my dog in for a simple, just having the ears cleaned and a dental. And I brought the dog home, and 2 days later he dropped dead. And I don't know, what can I do? Yeah. The first question I ask them is, how do you know that what the vet did caused it? Yeah. And that's probably the most important question that people have to ask themselves. How do you know? I understand it's human nature that to make a connection that, well, my dog was fine he's a 7-year-old golden retriever and was fine. And then I take him home 2 days after dental surgery and he died. And it had to have been the vet. Well, not necessarily. The law, whether it's right or wrong to think that way, the law says no. We have to know proof. How do you know? That creates a real problem. Now, and let me back up for a second. While it may not be as likely, it's possible that the golden retriever had a pre-existing condition that we didn't know about. He might have had heart problems. And having nothing to do with the dental surgery, it was a coincidence. That's possible. Or it might be that it could be a number of other things that happened that had nothing to do with what the vet did. But one of the first questions I ask people is, well, how do you know? And Lori, in most cases, the answer is usually, well, I don't really know. I think it's that because my dog was healthy before. And I say, well, I know, but that's not really proof. Now, if you go to the vet and say, what did you do? It's not rocket science to realize that the vet is probably going to tell you I did everything that is the normal thing to do. Well, that kind of kills your case. Now, in medical malpractice, Lori, what would happen is a lawyer would get the medical records from the doctor, which are very detailed by law, and go over those records, and with a fine-tooth comb, if, let's say, your husband passed away or your sister, and then now it's human malpractice, you would get a volume of records. They would be reviewed by expert other doctors who would go through it with a fine-tooth comb and say, well, when your sister died, your sister had all these pre-existing conditions that the hospital knew about, but they gave your sister the wrong medication in spite of it, and that's malpractice. But with veterinarians, one of the problems we have in the country is that veterinary records are very inconsistent. The laws are not the same as with humans. Vets are notorious for not keeping good records. One of my favorite vets, he's terrible about keeping records. He just, he's sloppy. He puts them together 3-4 days after he saw the dog. He's one of the most popular vets in Los Angeles. But when I go to him and say, well, I need the copy of the vet record what you did a week ago. Oh, well, I haven't written it up yet. We laugh about that, but it's not really funny because, that means it's not going to be accurate as it should be. And also, if you have an unscrupulous vet, what about them changing the records?
Right.
What about them writing them differently? There's not much recourse for getting those records before they might have been changed or written up to cover the vet's butt.
Let's give a scenario. Let's say someone takes their dog in to their veterinarian for a dental procedure, and it's standard veterinary practice for that procedure that the dog's given antibiotics and gives the owner antibiotics to give to the dog after the surgery. Let's say the vet failed to do that, was careless, forgot, and then 2 days later, the dog develops a terrible infection, spreads to the brain, maybe meningitis, whatever, and then the dog dies. So now we know the vet failed to give antibiotics and did do something wrong. Take it from there.
That's a great example, Lori, because in that situation, we know that the vet did wrong. So what do you do then? You can call a lawyer, and first of all, actually, the first thing would be to talk to the doctor and say, why did this happen? And actually, I strongly recommend that before you jump to going to a lawyer, to have a conversation with somebody else there, to first discuss with the veterinarian what happened, why did it happen. That can have a big influence on what your decision is later on. I don't agree with people who suggest that you suddenly take a confrontive approach, and once you find the vet did something wrong, you immediately run to a lawyer and say, I'm going to go after this vet, because I don't think that that's appropriate. And many times when people learn that a vet did make a mistake, but it was an innocent mistake, even if it did result in a tragic ending, that can change the way you look at it. And that's about human relationships. And I think that, having a good relationship with your vet and the veterinarian community is important. And as sad as it is, people sometimes do make mistakes that anybody could have done. So let's say you've talked to your vet and the vet says, yeah, we screwed up. And let's assume the vet is not particularly friendly about it and says, yeah, well, we made a mistake and I'm sorry. You go to your lawyer, a malpractice lawyer, who then tries to get the veterinary records. Well, you have the challenge, and my job here, Lori, is to try to set up people and let them know the challenges they face, that it's not that easy. First of all, try to find a lawyer that will do the case. This is a big part of it, is that in a malpractice case, humans, they take the case on a contingency basis, meaning you don't have to put up any money up front because there's a reasonable guarantee from the lawyer's view that he's going to get or she's going to get something. In veterinary malpractice, because there's so few cases of people recovering damages because of malpractice, most lawyers are not going to do it on a contingency basis. So your first challenge is to deal with the cost of, are you willing to pay $20,000, $25,000 or more to a lawyer simply to take this case, and do something about it, with the understanding that in this country, in 9/10 of the cases, judges still refuse to let somebody get more than just the cost of the vet bill. So in your situation, you have to understand that the likelihood of getting anything more than the cost of that surgery, and that's it. But let's say you decided that you have the $25,000 and you want justice. You don't want this to happen again. So you say to the lawyer, go forward. The lawyer will then go through the normal route of a lawsuit and request records from the vet. I have a lot of respect for veterinarians. Many of my closest friends are veterinarians, but I have to tell you, the possibility of veterinary records being falsified or changed is very real.
Yeah.
Or, as I told you earlier, with the situation of my favorite vet, because he does his vet records very late, which is not right, if you talk to your vet and the vet says, yeah, we messed up, and then your lawyer contacts the vet weeks later to get the records, that vet may not have already written up that report, so those vet records may change. They may say something that will hurt the case, that will protect them. But let's say you still get the vet records, and the vet records clearly show that the veterinarian made a major mistake, that in every other case in that situation with that dog, in that surgery, everybody would have given antibiotics throughout the country. Now you go to court. You try to get you have to come up with, well, how much money do you want? Well, this is the biggest problem or challenge in malpractice, and it was what I was saying before, Lori. The lawyer is going to tell you that in most cases, the surgery, which may have cost, let's say, $700 or $1,000, that's all you're going to get for paying the lawyer $25,000. But what does the pet owner really want? Well, they want more. I mean, they want the suffering, the pain. In some cases, there's an element of punishment that you should never have done this, and also making the vet aware and the veterinary community aware that you can't get away with this. Right. You need to be more careful. But the reality is that when you go to court, without going into the complicated legal analysis, and I can tell you all the cases around the country, the fact is that still in this country, the odds are you're not going to get any money for the pain and suffering that you went through, or the pain and suffering that your animal went through, and the pain and suffering that your family went through. And also things which is cost. There's terms like loss of companionship and things like that. So that, unfortunately, Lori, is the reality of it, is that assuming you have the best case in the world, the biggest problem in this country is that we still, in this country, not you and I, but the legal system looks at, our golden retriever dog in that situation as no different than a car with the wrong oil filter.
How about filing a complaint with your state's veterinary board? Does that get you anywhere?
Lori, that's an excellent question, because in my own personal view, that is one of the best alternatives in this country for holding vets more accountable. There's been articles written about that even though we still can't sue for a lot of money, at least the vet should be held accountable by his industry. The sad fact is that the veterinary boards around the country, the state vet licensing board, rather, there's virtually no examples of real discipline. I can tell you personally of many, many people that have called me that when I explain to them what I just explained to you and your listeners about how the likelihood of getting money is almost non-existent, and I tell them, but you know what? Complain to the licensing board, and then they get back to me that they never heard back, they never did anything, nothing ever happened. And then when I did research on this several years ago, I found that there was something like less than 5 vets in a period of several years that ever even got a warning or a censure from the licensing board, much less losing their license. The situations, Lori, when vets have lost their license was after multiple situations where countless animals suffered or died, and then finally they took their license away. There's many efforts around the country to solve these problems. Some people are working on trying to get more money when you lose an animal, to recognize that pain and suffering is real and that pet owners deserve to be compensated for the loss of their pet, just like a mother or father who lost their child.
Most veterinarians, they don't really carry a significant amount of malpractice insurance. How does that play into these issues?
It's a very big factor, and it's the major argument that the veterinary community makes for saying why their clients should not recover more than the value of the vet bill, that they shouldn't be getting pain and suffering. According to some information, veterinarians pay approximately $234 a year for $1 million policy on average. That is a fraction of what doctors pay.
Yes.
What the veterinary community has made the argument that if we start allowing people to sue vets for pain and suffering and loss of companionship, the insurance bills will skyrocket the way they actually are with human doctors who pay very high premiums, thousands and thousands of dollars, and that cost would be passed on to the consumers. As many of your listeners probably feel, veterinary bills are already very high, and many of my friends say, everybody's overcharging and it's too expensive. The veterinarian community says, well, if you think it's bad now, if you start suing us and we have to pay out for pain and suffering, we're going to be passing that cost on to you. The other argument, by the way, against allowing people to sue vets for more money is that vets believe that they will become it'll interfere with the relationship of the vet and the client, that they'll be more defensive, that they'll be afraid to be open, they'll be afraid to try things that maybe might not work but might work. And, that an animal is suffering with a terrible disease or, a fatal disease, they might not be willing to try something that would work because they're afraid of malpractice. So that's a big obstacle. The argument, Peter, is raging. It's still going on. I've seen debates about it, and nobody really knows if that's really true or not. There's disagreements about it, but that's it's part of the problem.
Yeah. Bob, we're going to wrap up this discussion going back to where we started. How can pet owners and pet guardians, what do they have in their power to sort of prevent these situations from happening, to where you really have to wonder whether lawsuit really has to happen, or avoiding this idea of malpractice having occurred?
I think that the pet owners have a lot of power in preventing malpractice. And what I mean by that is that you can't make your vet or teach your vet how to be a better vet. But communication, building up a relationship with your vet where you are making sure that your vet knows everything that they need to know to make an informed decision. And that involves a good relationship between the pet owner and the vet. If an animal is going into surgery, it's real important that you not just drop your dog off and say, I'll pick him up at the end of the day or tomorrow, but that you have and not just a discussion with the receptionist. Well, my dog is how old, and you fill out a form that did your dog not eat in the last 24 hours, but a real discussion with the veterinarian who's doing it about, well, do you understand that my dog has had this issue? This is the kind of food that he's on. I give him these supplements, that he has had a reaction to something several years ago. Making sure that if you have different vets, that the vet that's doing the surgery has all the vet records, and that making sure that he or she has read those records so that he or she is fully informed. A very important part of this is when you get medications from your vet, making sure the vet goes over all the consequences of the vet. Don't be afraid to say to the vet, what are the possible consequences? What happens if this goes wrong? What animals should not have this medication? Maybe the most important thing is when you bring your animal home from surgery is, what am I supposed to look for if something is going wrong, and not waiting. And while you can't make your vet a better vet from what they learned in vet school, giving them the most information possible, being a patient advocate for your own animal, and not being afraid to stand up and demand answers, that will help. And if you have a veterinarian who brushes you aside and says, don't worry about it, I know what to do, then maybe you should consider getting a different vet.
Right. If your veterinarian's not willing to have that discussion with you, then that's a red flag.
Absolutely. And it's the same for a human doctor, too.
Right.
Absolutely. Lori, when we were talking about what to do what to do when you realize that the vet did something wrong or you think your vet did something wrong, one of the first things that I suggest to people to do, even before they go to a lawyer or start anything confrontational, is to see if they know another veterinarian who is willing to review the records. It's something that I recommend to people all the time. If you have another vet that is a friend or another vet that you've used before, see if they're willing to look at the vet records. In many, many cases, the other vet that you trust implicitly will say and explain to you that, the vet didn't do anything wrong, or this was something that anybody could have done. Or it may be that they'll say, like in your situation, Lori, that everybody gets this antibiotic after the surgery, and I can't believe that vet didn't do that, and I wish you luck in court.
Yeah. So, Bob, someone's pet was harmed or even killed by a veterinarian. What do you say to them?
Lori, over the years, I've talked to countless people who have lost their animals and have called me wondering if there was a malpractice case. And as we've learned today, in almost every situation, they don't have a case, or it's not worth going. But what I've learned is the most important feeling is they want to know that they did everything they could. And they have closure because they feel that they've done everything for their pet, including in making inquiries, talking to experts, talking to a lawyer maybe, talking to other vets, and the comfort of knowing that in spite of the tragedy that you've done everything you could and that you gave them a very good life for the time they were with you, and keeping that in perspective. I found that most people, that gives them closure and they can move on.
Yeah.
And in more cases than not, you find them at the shelter, a couple of weeks later saying, I'm going to take in another one.
Yeah. Bob Ferber, thank you so much.
You're welcome.